Hi everyone, thanks for joining in. I'm excited to have Gina Perry joining me today. Hi Gina.
Hello, Jackie. How are you?
Good, thanks. I hope you're well too.
Yes, good. I'm excited about tonight.
Just a little bit about Gina. Gina is a factual writer by day and a novelist by night, and she's an award-winning author, science historian, and former psychologist whose feature articles, columns, essays, and short stories have been published in newspapers and magazines, including The Age, The Australian, Cosmos, and New Scientist. And her latest book, which I've got my copy here, is My Father the Whale. Just making sure. Whoa, oh, it's disappeared. And you've got your copy there. So thanks so much for joining us. Just wondering if you want to start off by telling us a little bit about My Father the Whale.
Okay, well, it's a story about a young girl. She's 9 when the novel begins, and she grows up on the road, travelling Australia with her father in a combi, and they busk for a living, and it's the only life she'd ever known. Her dad feels like their life is absolutely idyllic and that he's doing a great job as a parent in bringing her up in this sort of freewheeling, easygoing way. But the only thing he won't ever talk to her about, even though they're close, is her mother. All she knows, Ruby is the girl's name, all Ruby knows is that her mother died when she was born. And the other thing she knows is that her father just won't talk about it. So they travel all around Australia, and then their combi breaks down in a small coastal town, and her father Mitch has to get a job for the first time in a long time, and he's pretty unhappy about it. And Ruby has to go to school for the first time, and while he can't wait to get away from the town, he can't wait to get the money together to get the combi fixed. She's drawn to the town and to the people, and she begins to get an idea of how different her life has been to everybody else's. So the second half of the story is about her as an adult, and she really begins to question her upbringing and really begins to wonder whether or not their life was, as her father said, a free and happy way of bringing up a child, or whether he was trying to escape something, and what that was. And that takes her obviously on a journey to find out more about her mother and her mother's family.
And I just want to say to people watching as well that thanks to HarperCollins, if you do have a question for Gina, please type it in comments and I can read it out, and you'll have a chance to win your own copy of My Father the Whale. So please type away with your questions. Just wondering, what was the first idea you had for My Father the Whale?
It came to me when I was doing a short story workshop, actually, and I always thought of initially, a long time, I thought of it as a short story, and it was about a father and a child living in a combi and living a life very much outside of convention. And the annoying thing about that short story was every time I workshopped it with anybody, they would say to me, "This is too big for a short story. It needs to be a novel." And there's nothing worse that you can say to a short story writer than this needs to be longer. So it took me a long time to get it into, I think it took me a long time to admit to myself that it was a bigger story. And then, of course, I had to learn how to write a novel because it wasn't something I thought I would be doing. And so I had a lot of scenes and I'd written a lot about these two characters, but I had to find some way of kind of structuring it and bringing it together. And I put it away for, a number of years, but then I got it out again during COVID. I live in Melbourne and we were completely locked down, and I thought, well, I know, probably like a lot of other writers, I'd always thought if you had an uninterrupted time where
Yeah.
you had no distractions,
Yeah.
if you were not going to make use of that time to finish a project, then you never would. So I got it out and really worked hard on it during COVID. And at the end of that process, I submitted it for the HarperCollins Banjo Prize, and it was shortlisted for that prize, and then I got a publishing contract. So it was a long process.
Yeah, yeah. And Rachel's got a very interesting question. She says, "Do you think if lockdown never occurred, this would have been work? This would have not have been worked on and just been left in your drawer?"
Oh, that's such a great question. I think I would have got it out, but it would have taken longer. And I think lockdown was just that kick that I needed to really, it was quite confronting, really, because there was nothing else to do and no excuses.
Yeah. And Rachel also wonders where the inspiration for the characters' names come from.
Well, the father's name is Mitch and the child's name is Ruby. They weren't the names. I don't think I drew the names from real life, but I felt that his name suited him because he's a kind of a powerful character, and Mitch has got a kind of punchy sound to it. And Ruby, I was kind of hinting there at her background. It's sort of an old-fashioned name, quite sort of flowery, and so I was hinting there, I think, with her name, that perhaps her mother might have chosen her name rather than her father.
And Belinda wonders if your book is based on any real events.
It's certainly not directly drawn from my own life, but I can't help thinking that there are elements of it, of things in that story that I've experienced. For example, the father in the story, Mitch, is someone who really, having a child hasn't made a lot of difference to his life. He continues to go surfing, he continues to party, he's quite a hedonist. And I've known people like that, not many, of course. Anyone who's had children or looked after children knows that your life does change dramatically. But I've always been fascinated by those people who seem to be able to just have their kids bob along in their wake, you know? So that was pretty powerful, because then I started thinking, well, what would it be like when that child got older and perhaps wanted something different? And that's really, I think, where the seeds of the conflict between them, because it's a very self-contained life, living in a combi with just the two of them. In a way, she has to do everything that her dad says because there's no one else. And so putting her in an environment where she meets other people and experiences other families and the way they live shows her how life can be different.
And Kelly said it's a great title, and she wonders if you had any input into it.
If I had any input into the title?
Yeah.
Yeah, although it was suggested to me by someone else who read an earlier draft of the novel, and he sent me an article that he'd read that was about how male humpback whales, it was one of those articles, I think it was sort of written in the lead up to Father's Day, and the whole article was how male humpback whales make great boyfriends but poor fathers.
Oh, okay.
So I thought in a way that really summarised the father in this book, that you know, he has no shortage of partners in his life, but he's a pretty self-obsessed parent.
And Kelly wonders how you would describe your book in 6 words.
Oh, Kelly, that's a really hard one. I think it's a family story about finding your identity. Is that 6 words? a
I
family
think that's,
story, and finding your identity. It might be
yep.
7, Kelly. Sorry about that.
No, that's a good description. Rachel wonders, with your master's in creative non-fiction, do you believe this helped with the storytelling and coming together of the book? That's another good question from
Yeah, it
Rachel.
is a great question. Oh, well, I did a master's and a PhD in creative nonfiction,
Mm,
and you can see from my bio that I've written a lot of nonfiction, and yeah, I think there's a lot that I took on board in writing fiction that I'd learnt through nonfiction.
mm,
Things like pursuing detail so that people get a good sense in a scene of what the characters are thinking or feeling or experiencing. I use that quite a lot in nonfiction as well. But overall, I think it's that thing of having a strong storyline and
mm,
pursuing that and helping to shape the material you've got around a kind of a general arc. I think that was the most helpful thing.
mm,
Um,
mm,
and also, I love research, so I did, as much research as I could. I could tell
mm.
you a lot of things about the history of combi vans that was totally
Oh,
irrelevant to
okay.
the
Yeah.
novel, but I went down a lot of rabbit holes with research. But I do
Yeah.
think that gives your writing a confidence. You don't have to put everything that you've learned into a novel, but it
Mm,
certainly helps to know more than the minimum you need for a scene or
mm,
to make a world seem realistic.
mm. And
Yeah.
and when you were doing your research, is there anything that you might have found that surprised you?
Um, Oh, there were so many things I learned. I learned a
Mm,
lot about Australia doing the research because I have the father and daughter, Mitch and Ruby, travelling from place to place. So I learned a lot about the agricultural show circuit.
oh,
I
okay.
learned a lot
Yeah.
about country towns. And, I learned a lot about Brumbies. I learned a
Mm,
hell of a lot about Wales.
mm,
Um, so yeah, and I love that part of it, and I
mm,
think that that factual information can really inspire you.
mm,
So even something like that article I talked about that I ended up drawing on for the title, uh, thinking about and learning about a subject like whales and their habits and their behaviours and the way they interact in groups, it really helps you to kind of make connections to the story
mm,
and draw out that thing as a kind of a metaphor
mm,
for the relationships between the humans in the story. So for me, research is never wasted.
mm.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, and talking about the relationships as well. So Rachel asked, being a psychologist, did this field give you insight into the relationships between Ruby and Mitch?
I think it allowed me to, I think having that background allowed me to be able to stay with the characters the way they were.
Mm,
Mitch really doesn't change a hell of a lot in the book. He changes in some ways, but by the end, I won't give too much away, but I didn't want a Hollywood novel where people go from being, where he goes, for example, from being a fairly self-obsessed and sometimes reckless parent to being a wonderful father by the end of the story.
mm,
I didn't feel that was realistic.
mm,
I do believe people can change, but I don't believe people change as dramatically as we like to think.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I wanted to keep it realistic, and I do think that's where my background probably did come in handy.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm. And what do you hope that readers will love about My Father the Whale?
Well, I hope they love Ruby because I think she's a really endearing character. And
Mm,
because the first half of the book is told very much from her perspective, as a reader, an adult reader, you know more about what's happening than Ruby does. So there are things she misses because she's a child. There are nuances, or there are things that her father says that we as readers might question, but Ruby doesn't, because he's always said those things. So I hope you love Ruby, and I think that really is the most important thing for me, because if you love Ruby, you'll get invested in the story, and you'll want to know what happens to her and how she grows and develops.
And what about your own reading? What do you like to read, and is there anything you might have read lately you'd like to recommend to us?
Oh, well, I just finished Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver, and absolutely love that. And I love the way, I mean, I just love that book, but I also love the Poisonwood Bible.
Yes, yeah.
Because she creates such a vivid world, and she really goes deeply into her characters. They're not one-dimensional by any means. So I love Demon Copperhead. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. Yeah.
And Kelly wonders what's been the highlight of your writing journey.
Wow. Oh, thanks, Kelly. Kelly asked, is Kelly the same person who asked the 7-word question?
Yes, yeah.
Kelly. The highlight, I think one of the highlights for me, the highlight would probably be being shortlisted for the Banjo and feeling disappointed that I didn't win because the prize was publication, and then being approached by HarperCollins and being offered a contract was absolutely fantastic. And, you know, it has been a lot of work, and it's been a long journey. So, you know, I know people can write for a long time and not get published. So for me, I would have to say that was a highlight. Yeah.
And what are you working on now?
Well, I'm working on a story about it's sort of inspired by the fact that I don't know if this is other people's experience, but sometimes when if you go to a funeral, sometimes you find out more about a person that you thought you knew. You find out all sorts of things about them at the funeral that you kind of wish you knew when they were alive, because you want to know more about them. So it's about a young woman who has, I'd call him like an uncle in her life. He's not a blood relative, but that's the way she thinks of him. And he is someone who's always been part of her life, a very sort of steadying influence. And the story begins with him going missing. And in order for her to find out what happened to him, she actually has to start investigating his life in a way that she wouldn't have done before. So that's where I'm at the moment. I'm quite excited about it, and I'm hoping, I feel like it's got legs.
Yeah, no, it sounds like an interesting read. And when you're starting off writing something, do you always know how it's going to end?
Never.
Never? Okay.
No, and in fact, I'd say one of the reasons that My Father the Whale took so long is because I don't plan, and I tend to follow where the writing takes me, which is very exciting, but it's very inefficient, because I've got I've got so many thousands of words that I didn't end up using, but on the other hand, I find that planning, I feel like if I know where the story is going too closely, I get bored.
Oh, really? Yeah.
So it's a matter of balancing out that excitement of creating something, and then leaving the shaping and the editing for a separate stage. So I think marrying those two things is quite tricky as a writer, and I really try and separate them out. I really try to write a first draft without editing and without criticising. And then it's not until I've got that I'll even think about you know, more logical decisions, I suppose, about what scene might follow what, or what the overall shape of the story might be. Although those things often emerge organically, I think.
And do you have a favourite writing place?
Well, I've actually got a little office away from home that I've been renting for a long time.
Okay.
And there's an old meat market in Melbourne that's been converted into an arts precinct, and they have offices there. So that's been absolutely fantastic. And really, until very, very recently, I had no internet in that room.
Okay.
And that made a big difference. I've got it now, though, so I had to be a lot more disciplined. But that's a favourite place. Look, I think I get my best ideas for writing when I'm not actually sitting at a desk. It might be driving, long drives, or going somewhere different than I'm used to. Always sparks my creativity, I think.
And what about your favourite snack or drink while you're writing?
Coffee. A favourite drink would have to be coffee for me.
Yeah.
Snack, I don't have a favourite. I do graze though.
Well, thanks so much for chatting with me. It's been great talking to you.
Yeah, lovely to talk to you too, Jackie. And thanks everyone for your questions. They were great.
Yeah, thanks to those who joined in. Thank you. Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye.